Hello and welcome to the Malika Writes channel. My name is Malika Writes and today we will be doing another Q&A. So the first question is, what is your opinion on the character of Muriel in the Silmarillion? So I want to start off by saying that I don't hate this character, but she's also not my favorite character. The reason for this is I believe she had some sort of foresight as to what was going to happen. I don't believe she knew exactly what her decision to die was going to cause, but she did say to Finwë, hold me blameless for whatever is to come. So I do believe that she did know that this decision would lead to some sort of bad consequence, yet she still took it anyway. She still chose to die even though her body could be healed, even though she could recover from the pain she had experienced in childbirth, she decided to die, leave her infant son alone. And it actually caused a lot of harm. It caused the tension that we see because Finwë remarried and he had children whom Feanor, his first son, didn't necessarily like. So I don't think she's my favourite character, definitely not. But I do sort of understand her decision and sympathize with her decision, even if I don't agree with her decision. And yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on Muriel. We're not given a whole lot about her other than the fact that her son dearly loved her, and Finwë, I think, really loved her as well. But her decision caused a lot of trauma, and I think it's quite fitting that she was tasked with creating tapestries in the halls of Mandos that concerned the actions of the House of Finwë. So I think that was a very fitting sort of job for her to do. But yeah, that's sort of my thoughts on Muriel. The second question, what do you think of the theory that Gaston is a pillar of his community and not a villain? Okay, so first of all, I think that no matter which way you look at it, Gaston is a villain. The reason for this is when you stir up a mob to take advantage of a woman and her father and you victimize innocent people, it doesn't really matter what you were doing that for. You're still a villain. That being said, let's look at this theory. I think the idea that Gaston is sort of a pillar of his society comes from the fact that he is able to stir up a crowd. Now, there's something needs to be understood. You can be popular without actually being very useful. Gaston is a hunter, and yes, he is big and strong, but a lot of the boasting that we get in his song "Who Is Like Gaston" comes from his right hand man. It doesn't start with the villagers. Gaston just seems to be a larger than life figure in their village, but he doesn't really seem to have a lot of significance as a character within a society. He just seems to be the attractive guy who can hunt. But if we look at the time that Beauty and the Beast is taking place in the Disney story, and even in the original story, we're kind of around the Middle Ages in France. That means there's a legal system, that means there's a king, that means there are local lords, there's a feudal system. So Gaston isn't really a pillar because there are already systems in place. Perhaps in a hunter-gatherer community, Gaston might have been a pillar of his society, but he's not to say he's a pillar of his society is a massive stretch, and I don't think that theory holds if you consider everything together. If you are looking at it from the basis of, oh, big strong man, hence pillar of community, that's not really how that works. So no, I disagree with the theory. I don't think it holds much water once you actually scratch the surface. It just feels like, oh, but Gaston is a hunter and hunters were valuable. Yes, but not in the time that Gaston was living in. Of course. And of course, hunters of any kind, people who can hunt, people who can bring food, are always valuable. But to say he's a pillar of his society, a bit of a stretch, especially since hunting in certain areas could actually get you killed, because the king owned certain lands. His lords owned certain lands. Gaston is not a lord. So Gaston can't really just hunt anywhere that he wants to or bring back game. From what we see in the Disney movie, there is a community that has structure that has probably been imposed on them by a lord. So Gaston isn't really a pillar. We're not living, well, Beauty and the Beast, we're not living in a time where Gaston would be considered to be a pillar. A popular figure, no doubt, as attractive, strong men are in their communities. But to be a pillar of a community, it has to rely on you. The community has to be supported by you. Or we don't really see Gaston contributing anything valuable. From what we see, he stirs up a crowd to madness. That's not valuable in any way. So, yeah, that's kind of what I think of that theory. There are some who are still going to believe that no, Gaston, just by virtue of being a big, strong man, was a pillar of his community, but, you know, to each their own. That's what I think. And based on the story itself, I don't think that theory holds any sort of water. But let's move on to this third question. Do you agree with the sentiment that Attack on Titan is a masterpiece? A lot of people throw around the term masterpiece. I definitely agree. But I also do think that Attack on Titan is a masterpiece. Here's the reason why. First of all, the story starts quite small and quite simple. That's the thing with stories that tend to be really good. The premise of the story is quite simple. And when you apply to get your work seen by a literary agent, the first thing that you need to kind of do is to have a synopsis that fits into one side of A4 paper. And that's if your synopsis is long. Usually it should be about half to three quarters of a page. So when you are submitting, you really want your synopsis to be tight, and it's easier to do that if you have a simple yet very strong premise that can be built upon. And that's what Attack on Titan has. The premise is quite simple. It's a boy striving for freedom against oppression. What that oppression is, the Titans. Turns out there's a secret society behind that. It's easy to build up on a very simple premise, and that's what Attack on Titan does. If you look at all of the classics, they all have simple premises that can be explored. Humanity's thing with freedom and free will is a tale as old as time, literally. So for me, the story is very impactful, especially in this day and age where we debate about how free are we as capitalism, the big titan of our time. You know, what are the things that we're dealing with? How much freedom do we have? We talk about things like travel passes, wink, wink, and how much freedom that takes from us, our privacy. We're all about our freedom. So I do think it's a poignant story for this point in time. But I do also think it's masterfully written, which is hard a little bit to say because it is a manga and relies on pictures as much as it does on writing. But I think the real strength of it is its dialogue, and that's where you can kind of judge whether something is written well. Good dialogue conveys stories, so mangas rely very heavily on their dialogue. I'm talking a lot about the manga here. I'm going to get into the anime a little bit, but I do think for the most part the manga is very well written. It conveys a very good story. Like I said, the premise is simple and built upon very nicely. Is it perfect? No, but I don't think it needs to be perfect in order to be a masterpiece. So coming to the anime, I know that they switched studios. So first, I can't remember I think it was Wix or Wit, something studios, and now it's a Mappa Studios. And I think the transition was smooth, which is not necessarily the norm in terms of animation. When you switch studios, there's not such a clean transition, but I do think that was the case with Attack on Titan. I personally think that the Mappa interpretation of Eren's Titan is better because it just feels so much more fierce. It captures where he is right now. He looks a lot more like a goblin. He looks a lot more like the sort of demon that Ymir was supposed to see. So I think that the transition was very smooth, which obviously helps with the reputation of the anime. I also think that Erin's characterization was done so well. I think Eren is possibly one of my favorite characters of all time. I think he's just so well written. You resonate with him even though you don't agree with all of his actions. The Unlike most people in the fandom, Mikasa is not my favorite character. I think that Mikasa is a little bit underdone in terms of characterization. Here we have Armin, who is a character who is very well written. We get an insight into sort of his inner insecurities. We see him grow, we see him grapple with being Erwin's successor. There's a lot with Arwen, Lord of the Rings. There's a lot with Armin going on. I didn't like Mikasa's blind devotion to Eren. It felt like it was brought on by the fact that she was an Ackerman. That was the only thing I disliked about the story. It just felt like Mikasa's love wasn't real in a sense. She felt as if her whole existence was dedicated to Eren. And I understand that they went through a traumatic experience together, so I could see how her dedication to this one boy could be a trauma response. The characters are very traumatized. For example, in when faced with the death of loved ones, Eren laughs manically. That's not him finding the situation amusing, that's his expression of grief. So I understand that it's warped there, but maybe I might change my mind on this later if I do like a character look at Mikasa. But that was the only thing I just... Okay, let me not say that she's not a well-written character. I just feel as if her love for Eren was grating on my nerves a little bit because it didn't feel real. But there seems to be an insistence from the stories that it is real. So... I don't know. I think Mikasa is just a character that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. So I'll probably do a video on her just to solidify what I think about her, and also to give myself a chance to actually look at her character and maybe change my mind. But overall, I liked the characters. Overall, I think it was Attack on Titan is a masterpiece. I think the animation style is great. The manga is brilliant. The visuals that we get are amazing. It has some of the most beautiful landscapes in anime. So, in my opinion, it is a masterpiece. But I think because people keep saying that, it feels like we should be looking for something to dislike about the anime, because everyone seems to be watching it now. I remember when I was watching it the first time it came out and people weren't really talking about it. And I remember watching the first episode and going, this is something special. This is going to blow up, because that first episode was iconic, and it's the first episode that went viral, and suddenly everyone was watching anime, and suddenly it became sort of cool to watch anime in the mainstream. It's funny how that happens, but that's sort of my opinion and my take on Attack on Titan. So the next question: do you think that the fate of Majors and Maglor inspired Elros to choose the fate of men? Okay, so this is referring to Elros and Elrond, who were twin brothers. People who've watched The Lord of the Rings will know who Elrond is. Elros is his twin brother. And they are the children of Elwing and Erendil. So I do think it influenced them to make the decisions that they made, especially Elros. I've seen a lot of fan art that always sort of portrays Elros as perhaps the more rebellious or the more boisterous twin. And I think there's a good sort of premise for that to be true. We're not given a whole lot about Elros, but I think based on the description of how the elves saw men, which is that they were closer to Melkor in behavior than they were to the other Valar, I think that it's good grounds to depict Elros as perhaps the more boisterous, perhaps the less wise, or the more aggressive of the twins. Hence why he would choose men. I also think that perhaps the just the negative way that um, Majors and Maglor ended could have given Eros a very bad taste in his mouth about the elves. Remember, his parents are not with him, they're virtually alone. They formed this relationship with Maglor, and he and Majors just end up in a really sort of destitute situation, with Majors taking his life and Maglor choosing to just wander endlessly on the shores of the earth. So I think that definitely had an impact, because he's Elros would have lost people that he loved. Um, I think that probably would have given him the motivation to choose the fate of men rather than the fate of elves, who technically couldn't really escape the earth and all of the things that they've done, whereas men are sort of given an out. I've talked about this before, where men were given an escape, whereas elves were a lot more tightly bound up with the earth and the consequences. So I think Oros had a lot of incentives to choose that. Elrond is another interesting one. Why did he choose the elves? I think perhaps maybe he thought, I don't know, maybe he thought there was just a better opportunity for him to make changes as an elf, because Elrond tends to be really involved with the events of Middle Earth, more so than some of the other elves. So I think perhaps Elrond just had greater faith or than Elros. But this is all speculation. Tolkien doesn't really give us anything to go off. I'm sort of just pulling at straws here, but let me know what you think. Do you agree? What's your take on Elrond and Elros? So the final question, when exploring texts, do you think that using the work of people like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud to look at stories is imposing meaning on the text? Okay, so this is very interesting. I think that it Jung and Freud are useful, have given us useful tools through which to explore the meaning that is already in the text. There's a fine line when looking at text to make sure that you're not imposing your own sort of um, biases, and that you're looking at the text and trying to see what the author was trying to do. I'm not really of, I'm definitely not of the school of thought that the author is dead. I think that the author is the god of that world. The author is the master of that world. So, what the author meant to say is perhaps the most important thing. That's why you can't say the author is dead and yet cancel the author when they don't say something in their book that you like. We're clearly acknowledging that the author is supreme within the realm of their book. So that's the way I take it when I look at stories. If I'm going to impose something or infer something that I don't think the author implied, I'm going to let you know. I'm going to say, this is my opinion, I'm grasping at straws. I'll use sort of tag words to let you know that these are my opinions. They're not something that I think the author inferred, if the author sort of wrote down. But if it's something in the text that I think the author was trying to say and I have evidence to back that up, I wouldn't classify that as imposing my own meaning or my own understanding onto the text. It's unavoidable that you are going to do this in some fashion, but it's about trying as much as possible to stay true to the text. In that sense, I'm very much a traditionalist when it comes to reading text. I think yes, you walk a very thin line. It's about being aware and being respectful. I've spoken about artistic integrity before on this channel, and I definitely think it's something that we need to pay attention to when inferring. I don't think that using the works of Jung and Freud and other philosophers is imposing a meaning. I think they are useful tools for drawing out the meaning, because the author wasn't writing non-fiction, they were writing a fictional book. So they're not going to say, well, this is what I believe about the world, or this is the concept I'm trying to explore. That's not going to happen. You sort of have to look for that yourself. So I'm glad that these questions are being asked. It's important to discuss topics like this and to talk about artistic integrity and talk about things like the death of the author, and where we draw the line. What is the author? What is character? What is exploration? So things like that are very important to talk about. But yeah, those are the ends of the questions. Please send in more questions. I think that this sort of format of video is really good, because then I get to talk specifically about what you guys want to talk about. And I think it helps with the engagement in the comment section. I think when you guys ask me questions, it's also a way for me to directly interact with you and for this to feel a lot more like a conversation. So thank you very much for watching the video. I hope you have a lovely day. This has been the Malika Writes channel.